Yeah, so what we're going to do, we have this debate. It's an artificial choice. And what we're going to do is we are going to try and see if these two sides can change your mind. We're going to have a vote at the beginning before you've heard the debate. We'll see what the percentages are on the two sides. Then we're going to have the debaters speak. There's going to be opening comments. There's going to be cross-examination. There's going to be closing comments. Then you're going to get to vote again. And then we'll see which side shifted the percentages. So if you could bring up the screen, we're going to use an app called Slido. In a moment, hopefully you will see the URL, slido.com, and a QR code. So photograph the QR code or just go to slido.com. There will be a text box on the web page. If you are doing it that way, enter in the word debate. And we're going to have a debate. And the topic, could you please bring up that slide? There are the questions. And as you vote, you should see the percentages change. So please vote now. And while you vote, I will try and make sure we don't have dead air. So the topic that we have is we should prefer a system that promotes one of two things. The sound effects, they're all around us. And so one side clearly is going to have an easier time of it than the other. That started with Senator Warner's remarks this morning. But get your votes in. A debate topic like this is necessarily brief, so it's ambiguous. We're going to have you decide what you mean by startups and what you mean by tech giants. For my money, and the debaters will probably tell you differently, prefer a system means where would you put your finger on the scale? If you had to choose the egg, which one would you choose? And, promotes could be all sorts of things like, do we want to be biased towards, do we want to protect, do we want to support, do we want to foster, all those kinds of things. As you keep voting, and I see we've got some more coming in, just a note on advocacy. For those of you who are in the media, either the news media or on social media, the opinions expressed by the debaters are for the purposes of debate. So you shouldn't necessarily hold them to their comments. If you want to quote them, check with them beforehand. For the intros, I will direct you to the deck. But one thing that I've just realized is I forgot something, and I will be back in 1 minute.
Possibly be.
Chicken and an egg.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul Ohm. He is professor at law and chief data officer at Georgetown University Law Center. Flatirons is all about and so he builds bridges between computer science and law. Leta Jones is an associate professor of communication culture and technology. She also looks at the history of technology. Both of them, as it turns out, are at the Eastern Branch campus of Colorado Law, known as Georgetown. Then on this side, we have Brad Bernthal. He's the associate professor, and big cheers, we all now know he's of Silicon Flatirons, which was, for me, the big news of this trip. He specializes in startups, entrepreneurial law, early stage finance. And last but certainly not least, we have an award-winning author, a scholar. And, when I ask you, what does JP have in common with Trevor Noah? You'd probably say nothing. There are, in fact, two things I have in common with Trevor Noah. First, I was also born in South Africa. But second, I get to promote Orly's new book. So like a talk show host, Thank you very much. This is Orly's new book, The Equality Machine, just out to rave reviews. Among other things, it's an Economist best book of 2022, highly recommended. So with that, and let's just make a note of where we are for startups and tech giants are at 32%. We'll see where we end up after the end of this debate. We'll start now, we'll go with the principals, we'll go with Paul, and then Orly, and then Meg, and then Brad. So, Professor Ohm, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
All right. Hi, everyone. It is a delight to be back. This is in many ways the kind of origin myth of my life as an academic. I started in Silicon Flatirons when this kind of crazy professor, Phil Weiser, said, yeah, come here and do 10,000 more things in academics be doing, often around this conference series. And I have been the only constant with JP debates. I've won a few times, I've lost a few times. Given the fact that we're starting at a deficit, I'm not sure about our choices. When I look at the panel, one thing that strikes me, because I've heard the word midlife crisis about 152 times today. And I also turned 50 about 6 weeks ago. And I look at kind of my compatriots up here and I realize that I am the only embodiment of midlife crisis. This is an unusually hale and hearty and good-looking and active panel of people. And then there's me, this kind of schlubby pile of, whatever I am sitting on the corner. And so I'm going to lean into that. I am going to tell you why middle age is a wonderful the kind of wisdom and growth that comes with experience and age versus the impetuousness and irrationality of youth. Well, in this world that we're living in today, we should age. And so I would like you to understand that anyone who knows me in this audience knows what a series of screeds I like to do in vain at kind of giant corporations. This is a weird side for me to be on. I'm going to disavow the idea that maybe all I'm doing is shilling for donations from companies who want to support my research. But I really have, in the last kind of week and a half, we've been plotting our strategy, begun to convince myself that there really is a silver lining in the world we live in today, where tech giants really are running, roughshod over everything that we care about. And so the one thing that I think is really important for you to understand is we're not advocating for the tech giants we have today, right? And if you looked at the wording that we were kind of carefully negotiating, we said if we can regulate them. We're arguing for a future state of the technological landscape where there's rules of the road, there's meaningful enforcement, where we funded the enforcers at adequate levels. So in short, we are advocating for a world where we reimagine the entire relationship that we as kind of a polity have with the technology companies in our life. And if we get to that future world, and I know that's far-fetched, and I know we've talked a lot today about whether or not we're going to be able to get there, I would rather have a world with 5 tech giants instead of 500 startup companies. So let me just give you 2 reasons, and then I'm really excited to get into the back and forth of the Q&A. One, I've been a government regulator 3 different times, and I have to be clear that nothing I'm saying now has anything to do with the Department of Law of the state of Colorado, for whom I receive a little bit of pay. And I've noticed that interacting with companies really is a different experience based on where they are in their life cycle, and that the older and more mature, the more likely you are to have a connection about important human values that really does point to the kind of future world we want to live in. So I remember at the time, so I was at the Federal Trade Commission in 2015, and I would have, and I see Joni Lupovitz, who is one of the big reasons I was at the Federal Trade Commission, and I would remember like bringing Microsoft in Microsoft. Who had kind of tangled with the government in their impetuous younger age. They literally had older people who kind of were there to have conversations with you, to be engaged on the issues. And that was a stark contrast to the kind of experience you would have. Facebook, who were, still kind of in that troubled teen sort of age. And there was just something to be said for having kind of a maturity and a development about the larger companies that I think really pointed a way to a much more productive conversation. Secondly, and I'll be honest, this is one of the main reasons I wanted us to debate this topic. I'm a privacy scholar. And we're in this age where, privacy has come up on every panel. Fascinating. And we're in this age where we have no control over the data about us, and the large tech giants are largely lame. And so one of the things that we often hear is, well, antitrust and privacy are two ways to get to the world we want. And so the antitrust people would have you believe that if all we did was we took Facebook and we split it up into hundreds of competitors, that'd be so much better for privacy. This would be a wonderful thing to have all of our data kind of stored in the hands of all of these companies all of the time. I disagree. I would rather have, a few companies, as troublesome as they are, under our watchful eye than I would the alternative kind of dystopia to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And over to Professor Lobel.
Thank you for having me. So I actually also thought of Paul as the chicken, the seasoned chicken here, not because of age. I think we're pretty much the same age, but Paul has been doing this for a while, and he really does embody what we're trying to do when we keep a system fresh and we bring in new eggs and we bring in new blood and of a director. We keep him looking good because he has to compete, he has to respond, he has to still, be fresh in midlife. So this is an exciting time and topic, not just because of everything that we've heard today about the crisis, the problems of digital, big tech, but really we're also at an exciting time from the research perspective. So we know much more about the value of entrepreneurship, the value of competition. We really have so much evidence to support what we have long known intuitively. So we've long known that we need, a variety of nutrients to keep healthy. We need diversity for a healthy society. We need checks and balances for a democracy. And we need competition for a healthy market, a healthy economy. And all of those are deeply connected. So it's not just analogies, but it's really that we know that competitive markets also support democracies, and conversely, the more markets become consolidated, the more there are, very few positions of power. That is a threat, and you can look at this historically. You can look at what's happening now. It's a threat to, again, not just the quality, the consumer welfare, quality of products, and services, but also to the very values of democracy and kind of keeping the rules of the game in place. That's really important. Also really important, and I want to say this at the outset of our discussion, is to keep this question that is set and presented to all of us, to present it to you about what we're really voting about. So it's not that we're not going to have big companies when we have a system that supports new entry. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. What we know, and we see this, and this is even more true than ever before, the natural incentives is for everybody to grow. So, power wants to grow. Incumbents want to kill the competition. They want to stay in their positions of power. They accumulate. We see how much they're swallowing up in unprecedented numbers, the competition. A lot of it is catch and kill, acquisitions that are really just done to get rid of the innovation so that they maintain, whatever products they already have, whatever value they already have. And then, they start, having less and less of incentives to innovate, to have competitive pricing, to have consumer welfare. So what we need to do is to offset that system. We have the natural incentives that from an individual perspective, from a firm competition perspective, to grow, to not want competition, and then we need a system to support this new entry, to support entrepreneurship, to support a vibrant startup culture. On the consumer side, we know this kind of intuitively. I think it's kind of Kenneth era 101. What we also know much more these days, and far too late, this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, far too little, far too late, but actually right now is a really important moment. We also know that on the talent market, on the labor side, the markets have become very, very concentrated. We have labor market monopolies that depress wages, that have a disproportionate effect and harmful effect on women and people of color, maintaining the gender and race pay gaps, and we're losing really that vibrancy of what we can call the Medici effect, the kind of talent that connects. And really, when we do have entrepreneurship, when we do have competition over our talents, over our pockets, we each become more productive, more excited, more creative. And I think I'll stop here and happy to continue to the discussion with Meg. Thanks.
Joan.
Yes, thank you for having me. I have never been in a debate before. Surprise, thanks for inviting me. Yes, I'm actually gonna compliment Paul's big and old is beautiful argument with 3 very subtle points. Innovation is for the birds, choice is a scam, and decentralizing solves nothing. So let me get into those. When I think about 500 or 5,000 startups, to me, I think another decentralizing effort. We're doing this again. There's a problem, it's real, and we're gonna decentralize it. We're gonna decentralize the web. But didn't we just do that? Didn't we just decentralize? Wasn't that what the web was? There was AOL and Prodigy, and we decentralized, and there were like thousands of ISPs. It just feels like we're reshuffling the same deck of cards, and you go make a sandwich, and you come back, and the cards are in a bunch of mansions again. And 500 startups, the startup mentality seems to be the same reshuffling of the same deck, and it's a ride that I would like to get off. And the ride was supposed to be fun because it was about choice, but what is so great about choice? Choice isn't that fun when it's not real choice. And we keep pretending like it's a real choice, but it doesn't feel like a real choice when it's a platform that doesn't really bother with death threats. It does, however, have a privacy policy that references California, versus a platform where I can't talk about breastfeeding, but they fired the entire security team. Like, this isn't fun. This isn't fun choice. I would like some rights. I would like more rights, fewer choices. So I would like privacy rights. I would like data protection rights. I would like some accessibility rights, some rights to be forgotten, some rights to have some real humans to call. And the ride was supposed to be new and exciting. But that's all that it was. And I don't care about innovation anymore. I just want maintenance. So I just want to maintain the stuff. I want to clean up all the stuff we were supposed to do in our 20s. I want to go back and finally learn Spanish. I want to do all of these things. And I really do think when we think about innovation, I think about the midlife crisis character with the new business venture and the new hair plugs and the new car and lots of new things. And you haven't changed. He's still the same guy, in the convertible. He needs therapy, and that's the maintenance I want to go and I want to do. So we haven't done the hard work that we need to do, and instead we've been lured by the shiny. And I want to stop moving on to the shiny, and I want to stop ignoring the maintenance that we need to do, the social institutional maintenance the technical, the ethical debt that we've seen, the legal debt is just immense. It's just decades deep now, and I'm ready to pay it off. My set was a little bit short, and I'm out of things to say, and I've still got a minute, so I can kick it off to Brad.
No. I think we go for quality. Quantity really doesn't
thank
matter.
you, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the thing is, welcome to being a boomer. I mean, you made it early. So we will move over to Professor Bernthal for the last comment on the first round.
Yeah, thanks. I just keep thinking debate. To say that at the end, but I better say it now because I'm not sure it's going to be as convincing as Will was in old school. Static, predictable, graying set of companies. And on that, I'm going to make two arguments, one of which I'm sure everybody is probably already thinking of, which relates to some of the economic case behind a multitude of startups. But then the second is something a little bit more out of my lived experience. I'll bring some of this local to geography in terms of how startup scenes affect the people involved. So a little bit more of a human argument on the second. On the first, in terms of the economics, as Paul started, I mean, we of course are thinking about powerful incumbents of today, but what we really need to think about are what are the emerging technologies, the emerging industries, the emerging markets that are really going to be vital over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whether that's the problems of our time, climate tech, and things like solid state batteries and other things that are hopefully going to be playing a role there. The emerging role of different pieces of technology that are already here and are only going to get more important, like artificial intelligence, or around the corner like quantum computing, in the world of proteomics, for example. So in those areas, there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And here I mean uncertainty in a very specific sense, the Frank Knight sense, that is there's so many things that we don't know that you can't even put the likely success or failure in probabilistic form, right? These are things that are highly uncertain. And when it comes to navigating uncertainty, incumbents aren't that great at it. This is a world that startups are engineered for a couple different reasons. One is startups come at it from a lot of different perspectives, as opposed to one approach or one or two approaches within a large company. You can have a multitude of startups taking different approaches to the problem because we don't know which one's going to work. And collectively, we're better off for having a system in which you get a lot of shots on the goal and hopefully one or two emerge as successful. Moreover, startups don't have the classic innovator's dilemma. That is, larger companies tend to be really good at incremental and sustaining innovation. They know their existing customers. They are loath to piss their existing customers off, and therefore they play to those customers. Startups don't have customers. Startups are willing to take a shot at something brand new, and therefore they're less constrained by the status quo. So that's the economic argument. Probably not a whole lot of news there, but I tried to say it with great enthusiasm. And it does have the benefit of being right. Second is the role of community. And on this, I see that I've already been long-winded, so I'm gonna have to shorten this up a little bit. But we are lucky here in Boulder and Denver to be part of a startup ecosystem. You think about 10 best places on earth to start a business, Boulder, Denver's right there on the list, right? And by necessity, startups are such fragile little things. You have to work collaboratively in a startup community. And across so many vectors of our society, social capital is in decline. That is, the connections between people, the level of trust between people is in decline. And startup communities are such interesting counterbalances to that, where by necessity, because a startup is such a fragile little thing, you have to share information. You have to bring in people from outside the boundaries of the four founders, and that builds social capital. And if you think about an additional problem of our time, in terms of geography, it's in digital dust bowls right now. How do you have hope that you're going to have jobs in areas, especially lots of parts of rural America right now? And I think the multitude of startups approach allows for the hope of new companies, new jobs, gives that kid in rural America or a very urban environment the hope that there'll be a new company coming along that will that they could start or that they can join, and economic opportunity will follow.
Thank you very much. There's a job in broadcasting for you because you ended right on time. Thank you very much, Professor Bernthal. We're now going to go to the tag team wrestling phase. Could I please have 10 minutes on the clock for cross-examination? So each side will have a chance to poke holes in the other side's arguments by asking pointed questions. Since we only have 10 minutes, please keep the questions brief, keep the answers brief, because that means you get a chance to poke holes. Tech Giants, would you like to start, please?
Sure. You okay if I go first?
Yeah.
So Brad, I found that super compelling to think about social capital in decline. And I'm all for that, right? I mean, I was a child of a kind of born again evangelical set of parents, and church was really of where we found that social capital. I worry a little bit if the startup culture is really where we want to rebuild that social capital, right? I mean, to me, so notice the move I'm about to make. We want tech giants who are nothing like today's tech. But Brad wants a startup culture that's just like today's startup culture, which is fairly homogenous. And I love the idea of speaking to poor and the global south, but I'm not sure that's what the kind of VC and instead it seems like it's kind of uncomfortably homogenous and it benefits a certain kind of person.
What's the question, please?
And so that's the question. Is there a way we can get out of that trap and build this social capital that you're yearning for?
So, Brad, you can answer just about whatever question you want to answer after that. So.
I will provide a quick answer. I'm going to invite Orly to talk a little bit about human flourishment, which he alluded to before. And I think I just start by, and here it's hard for me to pretend, just to argue for a side. The concession that I'll make is, I think the version of social capital that we've seen in startups in these last 15 years is evolving and needs to continue to evolve, because some of the things that we have valorized in terms of networks and the power of doing things outside of the boundaries of a formal contract have replicated a certain power structure that's problematic. So I'll just sort of make your point even more strong. That didn't work very well for me.
Okay, so
right.
what's your question? So now you guys get a chance to ask a question.
Yeah, but the answer to that is not to minimize the power of networks and grassroots startup activity. The answer is to intentionally include more voices in those networks, in my estimation. And I really think it is a powerful part of our community, and there is a lot of value in social capital. We just need to make that move, in my estimation.
So I think we'll take that as an answer. We'll come back to you, Orly. Why don't you guys ask a question of that side? And if you want, you can address this question second time around.
You want to go first? Okay. So I have a question in terms of the notion of startups as less regulatable than larger companies for you guys, and that is in particular, it seems to me that not only do large companies do product at scale, but they win the regulatory process and in some respects engage in sophisticated law breaking at scale. And whether it's asbestos or cigarette industry, we've got industries that don't have a great record. What about your anxiety about that?
I think your critique of Uber is spot on. Right? I mean, you look at the entire gig economy, and here you have an entire part of the market that said, all we have to do is engage in general lawlessness, to the extent where they were kind of using algorithms to figure out where the regulators were and then give them ghost rights that would disappear. And so you're right that in the kind of like long arc of industrial history, it often was the giants that kind of played around with the law in this way. But now it's a business model. It's the way to kind of exit really quickly by breaking as many laws as you can and kind of like having a real hostility to the legal regime. So I agree. Thank you for that wonderful point, Fireside.
I don't know what kind of debate style this is that you two are engaging in, where you tee each other up to agree. But I think a
So,
huge.
so we'll count that as an answer.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
So what's the next question?
I would love, this is a real question. Can startups afford to protect my rights in general, if they look like the rights that we talked about earlier, you know, over the course of the day? Can startups afford to do that as you have described startups?
Yeah, so startups have to compete on all levels to become, you know, the next big thing. And it's absolutely true that it is the interest of big techs to design the regulations and kind of define the rules of the game, including different rules and legislation in ways that will be barriers to entry. So we have to be sensitive to that. I actually see the very question that we're asking about, you know, that including looking at barriers to entry by rules that just don't allow these kinds of you know, new firms to come in. We've seen this all the time. We've seen this with Amazon striking deals with the legislator, and you know, now Uber. I mean, Uber is a great example. Uber is a dominant company, so we need actually stronger antitrust rules, and we need to talk about predatory pricing. Uber is no longer a startup. It has 80–90% share of the market. So it actually did wonderful things at the beginning. So, you know, you see this, and we see this life cycle of startups, right? So, you know, Apple was a startup. All of these companies, they thought about the better product, about you know, protecting rights in more creative ways, using technology. There's actually so many opportunities right now, you know, when I think about privacy as well. And I think actually a lot of the tensions that we talk about between privacy and fuller knowledge and fuller data sets and innovation and better health, technology actually can help mitigate these. But the creative things that are happening and, you know, doing that hard work of those tensions, you know, solving those problems of the many different values that we have in a democracy and wanting to, you know, protect a lot of different things, that's happening actually in the startup culture. I can give you a lot of examples, actually personal examples, you know, from pharma and other things, but.
Yeah, I think that was very compelling. So next question for this side.
That's punto us then, right? You just said that the score keeps.
Yeah, we got
So,
This, yeah, of course. By the way, audience, these guys are not at all competitive about this, right?
Let's take a scenario in which we do want to favor a certain number of incumbents and play that out. How do you envision, as a matter of competitiveness, a world in which, say, the United States starts to tip policy towards 4 or 5 winners, and the rest of the world is trying to allow for a multitude of startups? You know, to my mind, what comes to mind is Detroit, 1950, right? You've got a couple of big automakers. They don't really compete with each other, and the next thing you know, the innovation is coming from Europe and Asia. And you know, if you don't innovate here, it's going to help work elsewhere. What say you about this?
Yeah, I think history is full of a bunch of different versions of that story. So IBM comes to mind as a big giant that was central to the global computer industry. Right? And every country tried to put forward startups, versions of their own winners, right? They tried to take down IBM, and it just reigned for decades. And then it was sort of eaten by its own, you know, its own startup, Silicon Valley version of that story. So I think that's one of the things that I find challenging about economics, because history is not always aligned with economic theory. There's always these examples where the theory gets holes in it, and that's one of those where I think, oh yeah, we've got examples of big US, right? Like one of the great things about being in the US is all of these other things that come along with being in the United States, and can support giants to achieve a diversity of values, whereas giants in other places or startups in other places, I'm not that scared of startups in other places. I don't know, I love America, go USA. That's some points, right?
All right, I think both sides have had a chance. I could sit and watch this for another half an hour for sure, and I hope you could too. But we are now going to move to closing arguments. Each of the speakers are going to get 2 minutes and only 2 minutes to try and persuade you of their case. We're going to reverse the order in which we went. So we're going to start with Brad, Leta, Orly, and Paul. So Professor Bernthal, over to you.
Yeah, I should not have agreed to go first on that. I've got like, no, this is totally going to be on the fly. Extemporaneous speaking is one thing, but impromptu is a whole different deal for me. I think at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, do we really want a world of the status quo that tries to cement what's in place? Versus, do you embrace the fact that the future does not repeat the past? And do you lean into an environment in which there's going to be a multitude of solutions? It's messy, but at the end of the day, new things emerge, which otherwise it would be a real cost to miss out on.
Yeah, the startup model that these young bucks are promoting is an accessible and realistic avenue for such a tiny portion of the population and such a small portion of society. It's a terrible way to distribute resources and opportunities. And I want people to have healthcare and childcare and elder care and the prospect of wealth and buying a home. And I want them to have better ways of getting those things than being a TikTok influencer or selling an app or investing in Bitcoin. We should invest where people are, and it's not rubbing elbows with venture capitalists at the World Cup. I don't want my library to have to pivot, and I don't want my kids' school to need a GoFundMe page. I want to stop pretending there's choices in the apps that my kids use in the classroom or the enterprise software that my employer buys. I want real rights, even if they're expensive. And structural change is big. And we should stop investing so much in a small group's efforts to innovate our problems or their perceptions of our problems away, and instead pay the social, legal, and technical maintenance debts that we've accrued using the startup model.
Yeah, thanks. So not to confuse everybody with facts, but what you just said, which is factually not true, that, when we think about distributive justice and job growth and income inequality, it's really the startup and entrepreneurial culture that has this outsized positive effect on creating more jobs, not just by the founding of the startups. So in a place like Silicon Valley or here in Colorado, when there is a vibrant startup culture, actually the incumbents also grow more rapidly and create more jobs and more income opportunities. That's just in the research. I want to close though with, I guess, two personal examples, and it's a response really to this question: why do we need choice? So one may seem silly, but it actually is kind of something that I spent quite a bit of time looking at, which is the structure of the toy industry and whether we have choice there. And I investigated, why we had one fashion doll for 60 years that couldn't be knocked off her pedestal, Barbie. She was white, she was vanilla, she was, overly sexualized, and no competitor could come in because Mattel was so big. It was the largest toy company in the world. It had 90% share of the market, and it engaged in frivolous litigation, and nobody could just, it just chilled all effects, you know, kind of new entry. And it was really by one kind of crazy, calls himself a crazy entrepreneur, that fought all the way to get, you know, good, you know, get the laws of the game here again to allow competition. The second one is kind of deeper, which is, again, personal to me. So we're a type 1 diabetic family. My middle daughter, I say she's bionic. She has an insulin pump and a GCM, a continuous glucose monitor. And you see this in the insulin industry, and you see this in all of these other examples where once you have these incumbents that profit from a certain like patent that they have over insulin, that they renew in all kinds of ways, or one medical device that, you know, is not that great, but they have the market, there is really no incentive to cure the disease, which actually we should have been doing. And when you talk to people in the industry, like it's always like for 100 years, it's been 5 years away, actually cure. And you see, and I'm very hopeful in the biotech beach, what I call in Southern California, where I live in San Diego, you see it's the startups that are working on solving the problem. So why do we need choice? Why do we need innovation? That's why we need innovation, because it's life-saving.
Very good, thank you. And we have now the closing comments. He tries to maintain order and fails. Paul.
2 points. Number one, they've talked about some kind of monumental problems for our day: climate change, fighting diabetes, improving the lives of kids. And I think we're just in a world of such complexity that the way you have to tackle problems like that is with resources and concerted effort and a kind of plurality of voices and input. And you're not going to get that from kind of 3 people in a garage who are just kind of trying to scratch by until they can get bought out by one of the tech giants. You're going to get that through the agglomeration of resources that can come from giant companies. But the last point I want to make is, you know, I don't wish this on anyone soon, but at some point when you are toward the end of your life and you're looking back, you're going to think, what did I do that was significant? One thing you're going to say is, I cast that vote at the end of the day. And it might be 70 years from now, or if you're like a transhumanist venture capitalist, 300 years when your disembodied kind of personality is living in a supercomputer somewhere. And as you look at the choice you made, I want you to have kind of 2 mental images in your head right now. So if you vote for my wonderful friends on the other side, you're voting for the world of Mad Max Fury Road. You remember this kind of lawless society of tiny gangs, and one of the gangs depicted was the string-haired, skeleton-faced Immortan Joe. I mean, that's who they represented. And in that world, you had your kind of Furiosa, so that's your Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you had your Mad Max, Lena Khan, and we're trying to get by, but instead, we're Starfleet. Right? We're representing a more enlightened future world where there is kind of society coming together in these giant agglomerations, and all is not perfect. So we have the Mark Zuckerberg Borg, and we have the Elon Musk Q. So that's it. This boils down to a simple choice. Would you rather have Immortan Joe or Jean-Luc Picard? Thank you.
So could we have the poll up so that you can go back to Slido where you were? And as you vote, you gave 1 round of applause, but I want you to give another round of applause before we know the results, because it doesn't matter what the results are for our amazing debaters. So as you vote, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to vote, and I will try and fill the air. And I think we are pretty much close. We pretty much have a result. And Nate is going to actually tabulate the results. And there are some people there who are closely observing the tabulation. But I think we can certainly say that the tech giants have successfully
Andy,
moved.
have my daughter vote at, what's the site again?
Yes. Yes, and so the voting was close. No. But please, the last thing is the Wolf Law building is going to be locked up at 7 o'clock. So if you are heading over to Kittredge, please take all your belongings. Don't leave anything behind here because you won't be able to get back in here. See you back here tomorrow morning at 8:30.